A doubling of gang-related gun violence in the last 5 years, a 5% increase in shootings in Toronto over the past year. There has been a spike here in the city recently. Something needs to be done, and we can all agree on that. Ottawa now trying to help out, pledging $54 million to fight gun and gang-related crime here in Ontario, across the province. Federal Crime Reduction Minister Blair joins us now to talk a little bit more about the announcement which was made in Peel yesterday and how that money will be spent. Minister, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's talk a little bit about the money. How much is earmarked for Toronto and the GTA?
Well, that's entirely up to the province to determine. The federal government has made available a total of $347 million across Canada over a 5-year period. When we came to Ontario in the spring and announced $11 million, which gave to the province to distribute to police services and to communities across Ontario. But we can still see a great deal of concern among Ontarians about the increase in gun violence that's taking place, and particularly in the GTA, certainly here in Toronto. And so we've worked out with the province to accept another $54 million in federal funding, which they're responsible now for, allocating to municipalities, to police services, but also to a number of other significant initiatives that are taking place in community that can reduce the incidence of violence across our communities. This is in addition to the important work that police and communities are already doing. But certainly those additional resources will be very helpful. I'm certain. I've come from that world. Frankly, in the 10 years I was police chief here, I can't recall a single incidence of that type of support coming from the federal government, and it's why we've worked very hard with the provinces and municipalities to make a difference.
Now, that money's been available for a couple of years. What has taken so long to get it here and onto the street?
Well, in the spring, I came to the Solicitor General, Minister Jones, and we worked out. We gave them $11 million very quickly. We've also been adding additional money. I spoke to Mayor Tory a couple weeks ago in direct response of some additional concerns that were happening immediately in Toronto, and I spoke to the police chief as well. We offered an additional $1.5 million, and that's over and above the $54 million we announced yesterday, to get money quickly into the hands of people who can make a difference in our communities. We've been working very closely with the province. The province has a process of determining how that money will be spent, and we all want to get the best value for it. But at the same time, we know that there's an urgency, and people have real concerns about safety in our communities. I think it's also important to mention, Roger, that the investment we're making in these types of law enforcement initiatives that will improve investigations and prosecutions, not the only investments that are being made, need to be made. We've got to invest in communities. We've got to invest in kids. We've got to create hope and opportunity in our neighborhoods so the kids will make better choices than joining a gang. And those investments have begun and been ongoing for us for the last 4 years.
Where would you like to see the money go? I know this is down to the province, but where would you like to see the money go here? I mean, you were the chief here.
I'll tell you, from experience, I believe cops count. I've got countless experiences in my police career here in Toronto that when I sent well-trained, properly supervised, and properly resourced police officers into a difficult situation in a neighborhood, they could make that neighborhood feel and be safer. By their presence. And so I'd like to see a greater visible presence of police officers in all of our neighborhoods, but in particular in those places where there's a great deal of gang violence. And I also know the importance of forming relationships of trust with communities and work with those social service agencies, youth workers, our schools, parents, families, and teachers in every community to build a better relationship, to work more collaboratively together. I'd like to see those types of investments. We also want to make sure that we have good data and good information upon which to act, because an intelligence-led, as we often hear the chief say, an intelligence-led approach is important, but just gathering data is one thing. But the analysis and the way in which we use it to work together is the thing that really makes a difference.
Are we going to see tougher gun laws? I mean, that can only come from Ottawa. Are we going to see those? There's been calls for it, a handgun ban, things like that. Will we see that?
Yeah, we've examined very carefully all of the ways in which guns currently are getting into the hands of criminals. And, we know that some of them are being smuggled across the border, a significant number of them. And so we've already made significant investments, nearly $89 million into the RCMP and CBSA to tighten and improve our border security to keep those guns out. We've also invested in the investigations into the organized crime groups responsible for bringing those guns. We also know a lot of guns are being stolen from legitimate gun owners, and unfortunately some gun owners are illegally purchasing and selling them. And so, those are essentially the three ways. And so we are looking at every option and everything that can be done to make it more difficult for criminals to gain access to guns. And that may mean additional requirements with respect to storage, for example, or more immediate and better interventions. If somebody represents a danger to themselves, if they're suicidal, or they're in a bad domestic situation, or they're online spouting hate, and there's a strong indication that they represent a risk, we want to to ensure that the authorities can take immediate and effective action to render that situation safe, to make sure that that individual does not have an access to any firearms. And so we believe that there are some very positive steps that we can and must take. I'm very confident that Canadians will have a choice, and the choice will be clear. And we want to make sure that we can bring in more effective gun restrictions that will make it far more difficult for criminals to get guns.
What are some of the things you're considering? You said gun storage, but would we see a handgun ban? Are you willing to go that far?
Well, I will tell you, I haven't put a limit on anything we are prepared to consider, but I want to make sure whatever we do will be effective, Roger. And I think it's important to recognize there's no one simple solution to this. It's a complex problem that's going to require a very complex response. And that means we are looking at all the ways in which guns get into the hands of criminals, and we're going to plug those leaks and keep the guns out of their hands. We also have to look at the demand for guns. And so we're investing in communities and in kids to reduce the demand for guns and the incidence of violence. That violence takes away all of our sense of safety and security in our communities. And when people become fearful, it changes the way we live. It changes the quality of our life in our neighborhoods, and it makes them less safe. And so we're looking at all of the things that we can do to keep our communities safe. I think all three orders of government have that responsibility, and I think we demonstrated that yesterday when we all came together to make investments in communities to make a difference.
Minister, thank you very much for coming in this morning. We appreciate it.